Okay, so our next speaker is Iain Maxwell. He's going to be talking about implementation of future regulations for freshwater planning. So Iain is Group Manager of the Integrated Catchment Management Group for Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Iain's had 30 years working in natural resource management, which has spanned the Department of Conservation, Fish and Game, the Cawthron Institute, as well as a decade working with local government. Iain currently convenes the Science Advisory Group for Regional Councils, which includes the governance of the EnviroLink program and chairs the Poplar and Willow Research Trust. Iain is an ecologist by training. Welcome, Iain. Do you want to speak from here or the mic?
I'll speak from here, thanks. Great. Thank you, Dougal. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Iain Maxwell aho. Dougal's nicely outlined my background. Another little bit of context I think that's important for today's presentation is that I co-chair a group of council staff and ministry staff, Ministry for the Environment, Ministry for Prime Industries, on freshwater policy implementation. And that's probably the reason why I was asked 2 years ago now to come and talk to this group. Obviously things have shifted a lot in the intervening 2 years, and I guess the future regulations are now upon us, and unless you've been hibernating you'll probably know that. And most regions are now well into the early engagement stages of plan making to give effect to the National Policy Statement. So what I want to do today is share with you my thoughts and insights on the risks, challenges and opportunities that are in play now or ahead of us as Council set about the creation and implementation of the new freshwater policy. And I would have said 2 years ago that this was probably the number one game in town, but I think this morning has provided you with a really useful insight to a topic that I'm going to talk a little bit about this morning, which is the scale and breadth of the work that's ahead of us. This is just one of many things that's now in front of us. And for those of you who are plan makers, you'll know that in a little over 20 months' time, our regions need to have notified regional policy. That's not a lot of time. So definitions, I think, are really important for today's discussion. And so before we get into the detail, I really want to sort of just get clarification of that, just to ensure we're on the same page about what I think the topic is. That is, what is policy implementation? So I'm not talking about RM reform or the broad reform package that's ahead of us. I'm talking about NPS FM20. And I note that traditionally it takes a long time to create and develop policy. We've just recently come out of a process in Te Mātou Māui with our Gatahere plan that took about 7-8 years and millions of dollars to get to the point of notification, and it's now just popping out the back of a hearings panel, and no doubt we'll go through iterations of appeals and hearings ahead of it. So traditionally there's been a lot of focus on the plan making steps, and I think you heard a lot about that this morning, that it felt like the game was over once we had policy out the door. But actually, in my opinion, that's just really when the work begins. That's probably the easier part. The more difficult part is to carry on and operationalise the policy and give effect to it at place with our communities. So that's what I want to speak more about this morning as well. So I'm focusing on that work that goes past the points plans are operative, and most of you in the room are tasked with partnering with our communities and delivering at the place to give effect to policies and achieve the outcomes that the Minister was talking about this morning. So this is look, there will be more than just this list. This is kind of top of mind for me. This is my high level view of what is ahead of us. It's probably shared by my sector colleagues, and probably some of these are shared by my ministry colleagues as well. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just sort of unpacking each one of these challenges or risks, and recognising that for some of them there are actually opportunities that come from it as well. So I talked about it earlier. when we're in the process of plan making, there's a lot of energy and effort to create policy. There's an enormous amount of council resource involved in it, policy teams, science teams, that the practical land managers are also brought into it. So the whole council machinery is involved in creating policy to make sure that it's right and that you can give effect to it. And there's an overwhelming sense of relief once you've got through that process and you've delivered your policy out into the community, and probably more relief once it's got through all the appeal processes and you can actually do something about it. But what I've observed is typically that's when the sense of relief gives way to perhaps a propensity to start focusing on the next thing rather than thinking about, well, how do we turn this policy into the right actions on the ground, and how do we partner with the community to do that, and what sort of resources do we need, how long will it take, have we got the right people? So that inertia kind of exists in the way we work, and for us to take those next steps takes real supporting tools, sustained focus, determination and drive, and often those are things that are missing as we get to the end of the plan making process. And look, the other thing that's kind of happening a bit now, and you probably get a bit of a sense of it this morning as well from some of the talks, is we've had to chase our tail a little bit on this policy stuff, right? So in my time in council, we've had MPSFM 2011, 2014, 2017, and now we've got 2020. And I hope that we don't get a 23 or 24 anytime soon. And granted, there are aspects of the policy in 2011 that have come through to 2020. The point being is that the constant revisiting, changing, tinkering with the policy adds to the inertia, because you're kind of like, well, which bits of it do we want to get started on? How much of it will exist in the future? How much should we really worry about now? If you've got this constantly changing environment, you're less likely to say, we know what we need to do and we'll get on with the job. So I'm hoping this version, the current version of the policy, sticks around long enough for us to get through the plan making process and then start delivering some practical programs and catchments to make a difference. The other thing I'd say is that really important, and I'll talk a little bit about it later in the presentation, is having the support and cheerleading from your governance and leadership in the organisation to operationalise the policy is really important. Because we've all got wide-ranging demands that will come along and try and challenge the focus. So you've got to have that focus of the whole business to move it on. So it was interesting looking at some of the questions that have come through to the speakers this morning, and some of the speakers themselves have acknowledged this. This is a real issue right now, and I think it's a massive issue for our communities as well. I think Tanira might have touched on it in his presentation. The wave of reform and change upon us right now is quite relentless, and I don't think we're actually equipped to keep pace with it. And I think the diagram really nicely illustrates it. You could cross out level of skills at the bottom and put capacity. It's probably the same thing. Effectively, the faster you go, the more the spread you're going to get in your community. So there are some people who are keeping pace and some people who are kind of not getting what this is all about. And so what this is tending to do, what we've historically been able to do is perhaps do it in a more methodical way that has kept our communities with us as we embarked on those changes. And they've understood the reasons and the drivers, and they've been more likely to onboard with the changes needed to be made. With the scale and pace, what we're seeing is that it's exposing kind of those gaps in our community, it's creating inequities, and it's probably starting to pitch people against each other, as some are getting it and they're moving ahead and some are struggling to keep up. And most significantly, in my observation, is I think Māori are challenged to keep pace and participate with this process and many, many others that are on the go at the moment, as they want to be part of these processes in the ways that suit them, but they're struggling with the capacity to do it. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge my government colleagues that are in the room today. In spite of the challenges that are in front of us, I think the model we've created for implementation of MPSFM 2020 is probably the the best example of a true partnership with government that exists with the regional councils at the moment. It's not to say the relationship's perfect and we always agree, and it's probably a little bit like a marriage. At times you agree to disagree, but at the end of the day we're sticking together. And we're well placed now to work together and adapt and innovate and deal with the changes. The big shift for me has come that there's now an acknowledgement that regional councils are not stakeholders, that we are the important partner at place for giving effect to these policies. So we're not kind of groups of bored people looking for work. We've got a statutory function, we've got jobs to do, and that we work when we're doing well. It's supporting government ambition. Equally, when government's supporting us, we're delivering on their work programs. So the way of working is seeing us share resources and staff in a high trust environment. We're free to speak our minds, and we're committed to actively addressing the issues and finding solutions. And I think what we've also found is that the stronger connection with government across many parts of government has allowed us, if you like, sitting on the edge, we've been able to kind of figure out where we think connections need to be made across government to help us. And I think that's been fundamentally quite important, and it's something that we will continue to focus on. So Tanera talked about this earlier, and I've said it before. I think scale and pace is a major challenge for iwi Māori. The reality is that we have relationships as councils with iwi Māori at place, but not often at a marae and hapu level. And I think Tanera usefully explained hapu in the scale and the complexity of those makeups and those people who we would have to work with. And we acknowledge that in many cases trust is not there, and relationships may not be as strong as they need to be, and we need to build those. And of course all of that takes time, and time is the one thing we don't have a lot of right now. We've got 20 months to get these policies notified. So having to operate at pace just adds pressure to those newly developing relationships. And of course supporting iwi Māori to participate in the processes is going to be critical in the future, but I worry that the pace isn't going to allow them to do that in a way that suits them. Despite all of this and the pressures and the deadlines, there's been real value in this whole process driving the partnerships together for better outcomes for the environment. We know in our region, for example, it's creating different ways of working for our councillors, for iwi Māori, for staff. There's a much greater grassroots connection at marae hapu level than there's been before, and we are actively building capacity for iwi Māori to participate. And that increased capacity is going to be really, really useful, not just for iwi Māori in the future, but also to help us help them in their aspirations. So there's some good stuff will come out of it. And I feel optimistic in the long term there will be a much stronger platform to build broader conversations on the environment off. So it's not all bad news. For those of you who are in regional councils, you probably know, but we've recently pulled ourselves together to kind of start to consolidate who we are as a sector. We have a bunch of special interest groups, which is kind of a boring sort of a title. We've pulled ourselves together under a banner called Te Uru Kahika, and my interpretation of that, or as it's been explained to me, is it's effectively a grove of kahikatea. So kahikatea on their own, even though they've got big buttress roots, are probably vulnerable to getting tipped over by the wind. Where they're all together and connected, they're much stronger and support each other. So that it's the concept of stronger together that kind of builds the brand, which is good, and is certainly what we would like to do. But at the end of the day, we're effectively a franchise. We're 16 regional councils and unitary authorities. We're independently governed, financed and staffed. And so the franchise doesn't have reporting lines to the sector. And so what we have to do is we have to work with influence and opportunity rather than, line management, which has challenges. But I think what's happened is that the sector's now really understood that to survive what's ahead of us, there's going to have to be a different way of working, and that working smarter, not harder, is our future. And going from that individual approach to collaboration is probably one of the key ways of surviving it. Equally, I think we heard this morning, one of the speakers mentioned, actually our communities expect that as well. So they don't drive around and see council boundary lines on the ground. And it doesn't make sense to them that there's one interpretation of a policy in one catchment and another in another. Okay? So they expect us to be collaborative and work together. And one of the other big benefits that's come out of this way of working is we've really been able to professionalise the sector, and we've now got people dedicated to tasks like freshwater implementation rather than relying on people to do it as their day jobs. On top of their day jobs. Now, I probably shouldn't be surprised about this after a long time in local government. This is one of the things that we sit at the nexus of kind of our community and the pressures in all directions, but politics is a key one. One of the things that's probably disturbed me most about some of the recent response to the changes broadly across our sector is the impact of social media and social media influences. So I'm a scientist by training, but I'm seeing the value of science being constantly eroded by social media, and it seems that those who can shout the loudest on Facebook or some other platform are the ones who are being listened to the most. And the evidence base and the voice of knowledge and fact and reason from scientists is being eroded, and that's quite concerning for me. And obviously it adds, for council staff, it just adds to the burden because we're evidence-based organisations, we rely on science, and if we're having to constantly fight off and defend the science as part of that implementation, it's just adding to an already busy workload. Funding's a big one. Most councils are coming off many years of big rate increases, so our region, we've had 15 and 40% rate increases over the life of our long-term plan. We've got new councils now. They've just recently been voted. Hope you're all voters this year. We had very low turnout to local government elections. Let's do better next time. So the new ones turning up, I'm seeing a lot of narrative that says actually these rate increases are out of control. We need to bring our costs back to the cost of living. So that's going to be really challenging because, look, you saw it on some of the presentations this morning, costs are increasing all over the place. And these are all new bits of work that are coming at us, and they're on top of existing programs, so we're going to struggle to keep up. This is one of the biggies, and look, it's great to see the publication or the material that NZARM are working on for capability capacity building. Look, it's across our whole system, across the whole network. We struggle to employ, whether it's a land manager, an engineer or a policy planner. It's really, really tough. And we've got a high expectation. You heard from the Minister this morning. Just get on and do the job. So we're struggling to get the people we need to do the job. And no amount of trying seems to change that. And interesting on that graph there, really, really low unemployment. I don't know whether the projection's going to come true and unemployment drops, but low unemployment's sort of driving that. Getting to the end, systems and processes. Look, in many cases these are just absent. So farm plan data systems, for example, should we have one nationally, or do you all want to do it 16 different ways? You know, it's that sort of stuff that we're working on. Great to see though that our ICT group have recently pulled together a system to support the nitrogen cap information. And look, there's lots of new ways of working that are coming up ahead of us. Last couple, takes a village. This is not going to happen with councils alone. We need the whole community supporting us to do this work. And look, I didn't want to leave without acknowledging, I saw one of the questions, or it was more a comment earlier in the chat. There's good stuff happening out there. This is one of our tributaries that feeds into our important estuarine area, Ahuriri. No rules, no policies, just a good landowner, good land manager working together, and they've created magic. So the magic is happening. Keep up the good work.